Welcome back, everyone, to another episode on Living Your Greatness. I'm your host, Ben Mummy, and today I am joined by a new guest, and his name is David Kincaid. So for those of you that don't know David, he is the founder of Level5, a firm focused on building valuable brands for client partners. He works with brand-driven business leaders across various industries to create successful brands that excel financially, socially, and culturally. With extensive corporate and consulting experience, David excels in uncovering insightful opportunities in people, brands, and businesses. David has also authored 3 books: The Brand-Driven CEO, The Value of Promise Consistently Kept, and The Brand Forward and Brand Back. David was also inducted into the American Marketing Association's Marketing Hall of Fame of Legends back in 2013. So David, without further ado, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Ben. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, David. So David, super cool. Before we get kind of hopping in here, the way that we connected or even met each other, my uncle Rick Shaver, who was a former guest on this show, is also a former colleague of yours and close friend.
Yes.
And he kind of said, you were one of his mentors, and after checking you out, you definitely have a lot of cool things that I'm excited, to tap into today for my listeners.
Rick is a very dear friend and, as you say, wonderful teammate, colleague for many, many years. So it was great to have him introduce you and I.
Absolutely. No, for sure. So let's kind of get hopping in here. I'm sure my listeners are curious, who you are. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, where did you spend your formative years growing up? And, what inspired you, to establish Level5 and become one of North America's most recognized and respected leaders in brand marketing?
Well, the actual answers to both of those lines of questions actually bleed together quite nicely. So, but I'll try to keep it short. So I'm a true blue Canadian, born in Toronto in the 50s. We'll leave it at, won't say which year. But had a chance to grow up in other parts of the country, down in Windsor, Ontario, for a number of years when I was around 11 or 12 years old, just before high school, and then in Montreal. So I kind of grew up through high school years, CEGEP years in Quebec, and then left Montreal and went to Queen's University in Kingston. I went to Queen's not really having a clear idea as to what it is I wanted to do. So I thought I might want to be a lawyer. And that's what I pursued. So I just started studying political science, economics, sociology, all of the things that back then actually the university called a pre-law degree. So did that and applied to law schools coming out and got accepted into 2 or 3 and was all set to go off to law school. Where the crick in the story comes from, though, is during my last year at Queen's, myself and a couple of friends who had been elected by all the students to run their student government. And that put me into a real test of being able to carry huge workloads at the time, but without really knowing it, it was also a leadership role. You got 10,000 people that voted to say, we want you to help lead us through the coming academic year. And as a result of that, and the exposure that I was fortunate enough to get sitting on the university senate and its university council and working with the administrators, I started getting these requests from companies when they were coming onto campus saying, we'd like to interview with you. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but I'm going to law school. And then my father stepped in and said, hey, anytime you get a chance, and I would pass this on still to that because I think it still holds today, anytime you get a chance to take an interview with somebody, take it. Because it's really just a wonderful opportunity to groom how you tell your story, how you present your brand. your personal brand. So I started doing that, and back then, all the big jobs that the MBAs and the business students wanted were the ones with the large packaged goods companies, Procter and Gamble, Colgate, Palmolive, Unilever, companies like that. And I interviewed with all of them and enjoyed them, but I was off to law school. So it was a good experience, but that's all it was. And then I interviewed with a company, doesn't exist any longer, but back then it was called General Foods. Today, Kraft or Kraft Heinz. And there was something about the two people. And when they asked me to come back to Toronto for another interview, there was something, just when you walk through the doors of the place, the culture, the environment, really started to stick with me. And I thought, wow, there's something kind of interesting about what they're talking to me about. The job's pretty much similar to what the other companies had talked to me about, but there was just something about the way it was being articulated, and the kind of people that were articulating it. And I thought, you know what? Let's see where this one goes. So I played it out, and sure enough, I got an offer. And I remember kind of going back down to get on the train to go back to Kingston, and my hands shaking because as I left, they gave me an envelope and they said, "We'd like you to join our company, and here's your offer." So I don't know how many kilometers I traveled on the train before I had the courage to open it. And I pulled out the letter, and we'd like to offer you the position. I think it was called brand assistant. And they said, and your starting salary will be $20,000. Now, to today's world, that doesn't sound like enough to cover your parking. Back then, that was a lot of money. And I thought, wow, I really didn't think I was worth $20,000. And I don't have a business degree, so I don't know why they're putting me into a job called a brand assistant. I don't even know what a brand is, really. So I thought, well, I'm going to play this one out a little further, and then I'll go back to law school. And here we are, 45 years later. Let's just say I don't have a law degree. I was fortunate enough to start at General Foods and really be groomed in a very disciplined development program, their brand management program. And I had to learn a lot very quickly because, as I said, I really didn't know anything about the business side of the world. And I had to learn it very quick because you were on the spot. You were managing a brand. And the one thing that I would pause and say is that when I say managing a brand, that comes back to future opportunities, because what I really would say is what they were doing was teaching you how to run a business. So yes, it was a brand. They had so many brands within their company, but they were teaching you how to create value, how to make strategic decisions, choices, how to determine what my options may be and why I should take this one. So building a recommendation, and importantly, how to make money. You were handed a profit and loss statement, and that was really your scorecard. Are we making more money? Is the margin on this product improving as a result of the decisions that you make? So it was a very interesting training ground for me, but I really got hooked on this notion of what a brand was, which when you talk to most people in today's world, you say, I want to speak to you about your brand, and you get, oh, well, okay, but we just relaunched our website. And my response is always, well, congratulations, that's great. I'm sure it's a wonderful website, but that's not what I want to talk to you about, because the word brand gets confused with marketing. And those are very different concepts, as was trained into me at the first stage of my career. You market a brand, but a brand is an asset. It's actually a financial instrument. It sits in your on a balance sheet. It can drive multiples. It can drive acquisitions and sales. So it's a much bigger concept. And if it wasn't for that training early on at General Foods, I can tell you I probably would have gone to law school. But they did make it interesting. They made it fun. And I was fortunate to get to know a network of people, teammates from way back then in 1980, who are still dear friends today, and many whom I still work with all these years later. So it was just a wonderful training ground.
That's awesome, David. Well, I really appreciate you, for sharing, how you really got your start or introduction, to the branding side, and also sharing like that story, of feeling that kind of corporate opportunity that felt right in terms of, just the work culture, the people. It sounds like the training, and it sounded like it made you more curious and kind of inspired. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing that beginning. And it makes me think, afterwards, you've played a crucial role, working not only with General Foods, but even American Express, as well as Labatt Brewery. So a question that I have for you is, how can we now pinpoint, we spoke a little bit about a brand, right? But for, like the listeners right now, how would you define in a very simple way a brand? And is there anything else that you want to debunk?
Yeah, because we could be here for 2 hours on that one. It's why I wrote the books. It's why I teach at Queen's University in their MBA program. It's to actually begin to debunk the misconception of what we talked about, a brand versus marketing, so that the next generation of leaders, business leaders, really do begin to use their brand to its fullest advantage. I say brands are probably the most misunderstood and underleveraged asset that companies own, sitting on their balance sheet. So you mentioned, after I left General Foods, I went to American Express, and at the time, financial services were not a very, what I would say, brand-driven or brand-disciplined industry that it has become. But American Express was the one that was very different. I mean, you were a member. You weren't a card holder. So the way they positioned the product and its services to you was very much brand driven. It was based not about what the product is, but was what the consumer need was. And you start with an understanding of what that need is in the market, and then develop the product against the needs. Most companies start with, hey, look what we can make. And we can make it more efficient, and we can make it faster. And then they just throw it out into the market, and they advertise it or market it. But it's what I call a product-led or product-fed business model. And hey, you know what? That's a conscious or an unconscious choice many entrepreneurs make or CEOs make about how they want to manage their business. Produce something, continue to innovate, but it's still the same thing with some new bells and whistles, and then just sell it in the market. The other model is what I call a market-led. So product-fed or market-led. And American Express was definitely a market-led company in a world of credit cards, which were all about the product, about the card, what its interest rate was, what the features are that you got with it, and everybody paid the same price for it. So it was a wonderful next step coming out of General Foods to go into at the time, the only brand-driven financial services organization, and understanding how to manage it in a very different sector. And then moving to Labatt, the reason that I was actually hired to come to Labatt was the company was going through, as a result of some changes in government legislation, a real reorganization. When I started there, you had to actually have a brewery in every province that you wanted to sell it in. So you had like 10 little fiefdoms, companies. And that was because of the interprovincial trade barriers that the government had set up. Those were all coming down. So now you could make the product in Toronto and sell it in Alberta. But what that also meant was that they could create stronger, or needed to create more consistent brands. You couldn't have Budweiser looking and saying and doing something on the West Coast and something completely different in Ontario, right? That is not proper in terms of delivering on consumer needs, but it's very inefficient. So they hired myself and another gentleman, and we teamed up with two folks who had been at Labatt for a number of years to create the first ever national brand management system or capability at Labatt. And again, I said, as long as we're building brands, not just a marketing department. And they said, we love your definition of a brand. That's what we need. And so at each step, I was having the chance to really have this concept of a brand become more and more ingrained in what I did, how I thought, how I wanted to create value. And, without stating the obvious, back then the breweries were huge. Like, they were the key. Everybody looked at them. Your uncle Rick would say the same thing. We had huge budgets. Labatt, not only were we the biggest brewer, we owned the Toronto Blue Jays, we owned TSN, we owned a dairy, we owned the Sky Dome. So I mean, it's like we had a lot of different assets, but across all of those, the concept of, but we are building brands. We want to build a brand. And as I became more senior within that mix, I had this wonderful vantage point to look across business being done in Canada in general. And that confusion factor that I speak about, a brand versus marketing, for a whole bunch of reasons that would be another whole show, businesses in North America had really created the confusion about what a brand was or wasn't. And that kind of bugged me because of that training that I'd had. It was like, why are you guys talking about your marketing when you speak about brand management? So I thought, bloody hell, I'm going to go and fix that. And I want to help business leaders reestablish in their mind and in their management practices what a brand was. And that's why I started, after I left Labatt, after many, many years, I started a company that did just that. That's what we focus on, is focusing on bringing the value of a brand and the thinking and the strategies of a brand into an organization that otherwise wouldn't have had it. And so whether it's General Foods, American Express, Labatt, I worked with 4 friends from General Foods years, and we started up Corus Entertainment. And my boss at the time said, we're going to brand air, because that's all a television signal or a radio signal was air. And brands were their call letters: CTV, CBC, Q107, Chum, 104 So it was all about where they were on the dial. And we were thinking, well, that's not a brand, that's their product. So we're going to brand air. So we created things like YTV, the W channel, Treehouse Television. So we branded air. So the reason I'm telling you all of this, Ben, is that over those number of years, having the management discipline of brand being drilled into me, when I got to a point where I was senior enough, I could look out across the business landscape and really see that most businesses had lost touch with that definition of a brand. So that's why I started a consulting firm, was to reintroduce the concept, which is why I write the books, why I teach, but also to bring back the tools, the processes, the disciplines to help companies develop, launch, create, as well as manage their brands ongoing. And it's been fun to watch because it hasn't always been easy. But there's many brands that we had the opportunity to play a very important role in creating and delivering into the marketplace. BlackBerry, when RIM was looking to brand the technology, Canada Goose, Sonnet Insurance, the Union Pearson Express, Pearson Airport. You can see across such a wide, diverse, and yes, of course, food products and the things that you would expect strong brands to be in, and retailers. But the fact that I give you the examples that I give you, it shows you that it starts with the leadership's mindset. What am I out to do? Am I out to create and launch a product, or do I want to create a brand? That starts at the very top, and it starts day one. And without that mindset, you'll probably end up manufacturing and selling a product. So slowly but surely, we're starting to influence those business leaders to say, there's probably a bigger prize if we create a brand as opposed to just sell a product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I really appreciate, that you mentioned the word mindset. You and I were chatting before this call, and I was saying how huge I think it is anything in life, but especially, with this specific example, right? In terms of once you understand something, and so in your case, branding, you can apply to almost any business, right?
Oh.
Any business at all, whether it's a personal brand, an organization, a company, athletic organization, sports, beer, whatever, right? So I love that.
You've created a brand with your podcast.
Absolutely.
As a result of the host of that, you're creating a brand. Then Mummy becomes a brand, right? So, and if you don't think through what and how you want, especially in today's world of social media influence, if you don't think through up front how you want that brand to be positioned and perceived, then you're giving control away to your own brand and letting the market determine it. And I just don't think that's the way humans are wired. You want to put forward your brand in the way that Ben wants it presented, because you know what reputation and legacy you're trying to create. Those are all strategic decisions. They're all up front. So that's building it around a brand.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that you even said earlier on was adding value, right? How do you add value to your consumers, your listeners, right? Which is obviously, I have my vision, I have, my what, my how, my why, but also knowing that, you have your people that you're serving, right? Which is your consumers or your listeners, or, depending on your brand. But something that I want to pinpoint here is, what is a soft power that makes, brands meaningful?
Well, that's, again, that's the secret sauce. And many years of studying them and developing tools and insight capabilities, what we've been able to do is actually now quantify this, because it is a soft thing, but it is critical. And that is the role of emotions in brand. Regardless of sector, what we've been able to quantify is 50%, minimum 50% of the value, the reason you would engage with a brand or buy a brand or switch to a brand or be loyal to a brand, are as a result of emotional attributes. And then there's the rational product features. It's at the right price. It gives me the right type of scent or taste or whatever I'm looking for. So, but it's how it makes me feel. And in the world that I came from in beer, I'm not trying to belittle the brewmasters that are all out there, but if you look at the major brands, and if you took the bottles and the labels away and had people try them all, they would all, yeah, they all kind of taste the same. And that's because they're kind of brewed the same way. But as soon as I said, pick your beer, and you said, oh, I've tasted it, I'm a beer expert, typical male especially. Oh, I knew this is my beer right here. Oh, you drink Molson Export? No, I'd never drink Molson Export. Well, why? Well, I'm not a blue collar longshoreman. I don't smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. Like, they start to actually throw imagery out of what they are or what they aren't. And then you'd say, well, so what brand do you drink? Well, I drink Creemore. I want something that's unique and special and premium, brewed differently, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, then why didn't you pick it when you drank it? It was because I didn't know I was drinking it. So the role, as soon as I put that label and that bottle, boom, they know exactly what their brand is. Without it, they're a little lost. So it shows that the emotional reaction to just simply seeing the brand name and the label is critical. The interesting part in all that, though, after having, especially in the entertainment world that I played in, as well as the breweries, what we discovered was marketers for many years now have acknowledged the important role of emotion. They would say that emotions shape attitudes, which drive behavior. That formula is not new. That's why the research world, usage and attitude studies, like their UNA studies are quite common, tracking studies. So it's not that there's been pushback to the importance of the emotion, but what I started to discover in the work that I was doing was that human beings can't articulate emotion. So as a marketer or a brand manager, you go, that's critical, but I'm going to have to use the limited vocabulary or expression of what those emotions are, because that's all they're actually, there's a roadblock. It took us 5 years to build a tool. At the time, is a very innovative research company called HotSpecs that we partnered with. And what we discovered, working with 5 different groups of neuroscientists all around the world, one of them a Nobel Prize winner, by the way, was, I would call it a confirmation that humans can't articulate emotion. Step 1. Men on average can articulate about 10. If you just asked a guy to tell me every emotion that you think you've got or you're aware of, blah, 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 they get to about 10. Once you tell them that hungry isn't an emotion, it's a need. So guys get to about 10. Women get to about 14. So call it a draw at 12 for males and females. That covers most human beings. What the neuroscientists discovered within your brain, your cerebral cortex, is that every human being, anywhere around the world, no matter how well educated, what their demographics are, what their education is, every human being is born with 96 individual identifiable emotions. And then they all permutate and combinate. But so 96 raw individual emotions that humans can only articulate maybe 12 of. So as a brand manager, you go out and you talk to your market. But if you don't realize, but they've got a limited vocabulary, you're leaving a lot of understanding about what those emotional needs are on the table simply because they couldn't articulate them. So the tool that we created was a way to actually identify all these 96 and then let people pick them like a smorgasbord. So when you show them an ad or you show them a new product or a brand, you go from about 3 to 4 emotions that get named in a typical research study to about 33. So if emotions are about 50% of, on average, decision making and behavior for any human being, and you've just figured out a way to more than 10 times increase your understanding of what those emotions are, you've created competitive advantage. You're a brand owner that knows something that your competitors don't know, because I've used this tool and I've pulled out much deeper and broader understanding of my consumer. So that was a critical step in us bringing new value as a consulting firm. We don't want to just do what everybody else does. We wanted to bring new tools and new insights and measurement capability to the market. And that's what we've done. And it seems to have worked.
That's awesome. No, I love that. Well, and that's kind of, taking data, right? Taking factual information and applying it, right? Using that to make, a better decision, right? Because you have a better connection, obviously, with your audience, right? Or with your consumer, right?
Exactly.
So something that I want to continue off of that, like you've been passionate, right? Helping out all these different brands and companies across the world, to the point where you wrote one of your books, which was The Brand Driven CEO, right? So question that I have, what inspired you, to write that book, and why do you believe, brand integration is so crucial for business strategy?
But what prompted, because The Brand Driven CEO is the third book in that 3-book series that you mentioned. The second book was actually what set up the need to do the third one. And that one was, I titled the book around my definition of what a brand is, which I've said is the value. So again, balance sheet, P&L, it creates value that I can measure. The value of a promise consistently kept. So, if I tell you that this new iPhone is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you stand in the pouring rain at 4 a.m. to get the new iPhone and the camera doesn't work, they've made you a promise, but they didn't keep it. And it could be for technical reasons, rational reasons, but it could be for those emotional reasons that we talked about, right? Wow, yeah, the camera doesn't work. And when I went to the Apple, to the store, and I went to speak to a customer service rep, they were rude to me. They made me feel stupid. There's all those emotional elements. So a brand is a promise that I'm making in the market that I know I can keep 24/7. That's what creates loyalty. It's the same with a human relationship, right? So that definition, after I wrote that second book, I found that somebody had finally put the definition of what a brand was in what I call human speak, not consultant or marketing gobbledygook, because people could understand that logic. Hey, if I make a promise to you, if I promise you, Ben, to be on this podcast, and 3 times in a row I never showed up to tape it with you, are you likely to ask me again? Are you likely to value the relationship that you might or might not have with me? So, I mean, it's pretty common sense, but that's what great brands do. So it was so articulated in such a simple way that when I started to talk to top business leaders around the world, not just in Canada, these are CEOs that I would be able to point to their financial results. I'd be able to point to their market capitalization, their stock price. And they, in what I thought they had done, was built a great brand. But when I started to talk to them, what I realized is that yes, they had, but one of the reasons that they grew so quickly is that their competitors didn't manage a brand. So the reason I wanted to write the third book, to your question, is if my personal goal was to help business leaders reestablish their brand up here as the value of a promise consistently kept, it has to start at the top. And when I interviewed those CEOs for the book, that was confirmed. The leadership of the organization sets the tone. We are either brand driven or we're not. And when you are brand driven, what I identified through the research is there's certain values, there's certain management techniques, there's certain ways that they structure their organizations, there's certain tools that they create, to the point where I was able to summarize all of this. It took 5 years to complete all the upfront research behind it, but I could start to put it together. And what it was clear is that everything that they were talking about was about the way they managed people within their organization, the way they managed partners that they relied on outside their organization, the way they managed their customer. So there was a lot of people skills, process. They found those 2 or 3 core processes internally that in some cases didn't have anything to do with how their product was actually made. They left that for the production people. It could have been a process around how they pull out and measure customer insight, the way they handle the customer experience from end to end. So people, processes, IP, they were all very sensitive to patents, trademarks, copyrights. In this world with the acknowledgement that emotions are important, how do you own an emotion? It's pretty hard, right? But I can own the stimulus to that emotion. And if I don't put a trademark, or if I don't protect my brand and its soft value, then it does lose value. So IP, intellectual property, is a key component to their thinking. And the last is partnerships. In today's world, they don't expect their company to do everything. So if they understand their promise and what is needed to consistently keep it, I may go outside my company and bring in subject matter experts on contracts. I may bring in sponsors, suppliers. So those partnerships are a very important element. And what that started to show me was, hey, if everybody thinks brand is marketing, you've probably heard about the 4 P's of marketing, right? Price, product, promotion, packaging. Well, what these brand-driven CEOs were doing was giving me the new set of 4 P's: people, process, partnerships, IP. Bit of a play on it there, but like there's 4 big bundles of focus of activity. And to set those up, to allocate resources, to prioritize them within a large organization, that has to start at the top. And that's really what I discovered is people love the definition, value of a promise consistently kept, but they would also point to their organization as either living by it in their own way or not. So that's why I wrote the third book.
That's awesome, David. Well, I appreciate you, giving us, taste of the book, as well as talking about the 4 new P's of branding. All makes sense too, that connection, as you explained it, how they are all interconnected and kind of related. And, a question that I'm curious to ask you about is, when, a brand driven CEO is thinking about their company, and thinking about, okay, we want to make better connections, with our consumers, or our partners. So essentially looking at like the P, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like people, right? What are some crucial quality questions that they should ask themselves so then they could, produce better results for their brand and leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would simplify what is outlined in great detail in the book to say it does start with the ability to create a meaningful and inspiring purpose, like, and vision. So a lot of people go, yeah, those are just words, and they put them on a plaque and put them in the lobby. There we go, we're done. Well, no, that's in today's world. Consumers and employees, younger generations of employees, want to work at companies or organizations that they believe in, especially with ESG issues, with you look at diversity and equality. They want to know that they are investing their time or their money, if you're the consumer, in something that's actually bigger than just the product or service that I'm buying. It's the way that product is created. It's how its ingredients are sourced. It's how it treats people throughout its supply chain. It's that thing, and they do. And they spend the time, surprisingly, large amounts of time researching that stuff. So if the CEO and their leadership team hasn't set a very compelling, inspiring purpose and vision for the company beyond making money or producing something, it's very difficult to begin to breed an environment in which a brand can survive and grow. The second, though, is once that vision has been stated, it's being able to then set what I call the guardrails, which are the values of the organization. So as we pursue that purpose and vision, here's how we are going to treat one another. Here's how we are going to treat our customers and our consumers, our partners. And the values aren't just nice words like honesty or collaboration, or it's what does that mean? And then the third element is, and what behaviors are we going to focus on that fit that definition? And oh, by the way, how are we going to use them to screen candidates to join the company? How are we going to use those to acknowledge or recognize people for over and above performance? How are we going to use those things to be able to turn around and maintain and create loyalty so that people say, I want to stay here, man. I want to be part of this thing. So those all sound very, very soft to people that maybe have came up through the 80s and the 90s, real financially driven kind of environment. The thing is, those financial requirements haven't gone away. Those are still needed to drive value for the company. But all of what I've just talked about surrounds all of those financial elements. Who are we? Why do we exist? Where are we going? Do you want to be part of that or not? And you're going to be rewarded if you deliver a great result using these guardrails. So that comes from the leadership of the company. They've got to state that. And then as juniors become seniors, if they want to reinterpret those or change them or whatever, that's great. But during that leader's time, this is how we're going to operate, and here's why we're going to operate that way. That's a very, very important element.
I appreciate that answer. And, something that I want to shift to, a big mentor that you've had in your life is a former boss, and his name is Hugo Powell. And, so if you could just talk about, your experience working with him, who he is, and, are there any memorable highlights or even lessons that you learned?
Well, he was a mentor for one overarching reason. And he had this expression that he used to use that I loved. It scared the bejesus out of some people, but I loved it. And he says, we're going to operate with tough love. Tough love. We're going to be tough on the issues that matter in terms of our responsibilities to shareholders, to our consumers, to our partners. So very tough to make sure that we operate as a brand. So operate a lot of in the way that I've just articulated. So very tough on that. The love is that we will always treat people with respect and acknowledge that you're not an employee number. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got their own circumstances. And, just because somebody's having a bad month or a bad year doesn't mean that they're suddenly a bad employee. They could have had all kinds of family issues that they're trying to deal with. We're human, right? So he always respected first principles, the people that were on the team, because they were the people he wanted on the team. And once you were on his team, he would walk over crushed glass for you. That said, what motivates the reason why he's chosen you to be on the team is because you can deliver those results. You've got a huge results orientation. You've got an undying level of attention to detail. It's the small things that make things really big in the market. So he always had that wonderful tough love principle. And I thought, that's leadership. That's not management. Like, you can be the CEO and be a great manager of things, right? Leadership and management are different. Management makes me more efficient, tells me what I got to do, kind of by the law, by the rules of the road. Leadership inspires me. So tell me what to do, or inspire me to come forward with ideas on what I think we should do. It's again, sounds so, I don't mean to make it sound so black and white, but in all of the corporate environments that I've worked in, a lot of the clients that I've had the chance to observe and watch, the simplicity of tough love is not really applied in a lot of places, because you've got a lot of people in senior roles who are good managers. We don't have a ton of great leaders. And that's why he always inspired me and why he was a mentor, because I always kind of wanted to be able to lead like he did. And I'm trying. I don't think I'll ever be as good as he is, but that motivation, because I could see it. He didn't just say it, he lived it. That's the way he treated people. So he's very, very special to me.
I appreciate that answer. Just because, it is cool, watching that interview. I actually recommend everyone check it out. But, we heard from this discussion, that you're super passionate about, brand-driven CEOs, right? And, Hugo Powell is definitely an example of a world-class individual when it comes to that, right? And, you just gave us, some insider information, but even just to expand on that, right? He did a lot of cool leadership roles at different brands, and his story, and you kind of showcase it in that interview. Yeah. And for those who don't know, right, when it came to Labatt, he was pretty high up, right?
Well, he ended up as the CEO of Interbrew, so which is now the largest brewer in the world, and largely because of great leadership and management decisions that he made during his tenure. Yeah,
that's awesome. So something that I want to pinpoint off of that, when we think of these world-class brand-driven CEOs, a lot of them you've either witnessed yourself, working with them, or working alongside, from like a consulting role. What do you believe, it takes, for a brand-driven CEO to go from good to great?
Well, you should, before I give you my answer, Jim Collins, who's a wonderful business writer, very smart academic as well, wrote a book called Good to Great. And he does a pretty good job of laying out the different levels that get you up to great, from good or okay or fair. I'd recommend your listeners give a good read of that one, because it's backed up with mounds of research. So it's a good one. But I would draw a little bit off what he points to, and that is, to be a great leader, you actually have to have the confidence to expose yourself, make your feelings, make your thoughts known. It's okay for somebody to come in with a different point of view versus yours. Yeah, you might be in the chair at the top, but it's hard to inspire you to come forward with great thinking in areas that you have skills in that I don't have, if you're not inspired to. And so that person in that top chair really needs to be comfortable exposing themselves to others, to other viewpoints, to other ideas, to other requirements, needs, which means you got to be very human. I think through the .com bubble and crash, through the tech bubble and crash, and then the financial, with the importance of, during the years of consolidation in the stock market, everything was about the numbers. And I get that. I'm not in any way saying that the numbers aren't important, but great leaders understand that it's the people behind the system that create the numbers. The numbers don't just happen on their own. You can't manage people to grow. You have to inspire them. You have to almost reward them, incent them to grow. And that requires just really being in touch with yourself, confident, your own self-confidence, your human personality. If you're one person out of the office and a different person when you're in the office, then that's not you. That's you playing roles. Great leaders are themselves. Steve Jobs would be the first to tell you what his issues and his shortcomings were. Everybody knew what his strengths were, but he also had no problem turning around and telling you where he fell short. Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, talks about this as well. And I don't know whether you can train yourself to do that, Ben. I don't know. I think you're either kind of born with an acceptance all the way growing up. You're okay getting feedback or getting criticism, or you become very defensive. You're okay exploring things that you don't have all the answers for, which means you've got to bring in other people. You're okay doing that, or you need to be the center of attention, right? Like it all depends on the kind of individual that you are and your confidence and willing to say, I don't know everything, but I'm going to focus on the stuff that I think is important, which is all around inspiring you. That's what a great leader is.
I love that. And that goes again with, the human first mentality, right? So I love that. I love your explanation. Very thorough. Something that I want to go to that I asked everyone on my show, David, the purpose of the podcast is to inspire millions of people across the world to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
Happiness. I can have as much money as I want or need or even more and be miserable. You can't buy happiness. Right? So it's funny because just this morning I was speaking to one of my former students who works and lives in Germany. And he's, I think I want to come back to Canada. And I want to work in Canada. And it's like, okay, why? Well, I really had fun in my 2 years there, and I loved coming down to Toronto to go out to the bars and the restaurants and the hockey game. And then I went to Vancouver and I loved the outdoors and the mountains. I said, okay, but are you coming as a tourist? Are you coming to live? Like, understand what makes you happy. And that sounds like such a simple question, but boy, oh boy, that's the toughest thing that you have to try to answer. And the answer always changes as you get older, as you go through different stages of life. You become a parent. What makes you happy is very different than when you were 18. So if you're not happy, you really have nothing. So I'm not trying to skirt your very probing question, but it's a pretty simple answer for me.
No, I love that. And no, I think that's crucial is, greatness could be moment to moment, but really the fundamental thing is, how are you feeling, right? Are you happy, right? And it's all interconnected.
Yeah. And the culture that I've tried to build at Level 5 at our company, I've tried to say, for me, happiness, when I was the most happy, I was always around people that made me better, not people that agreed with me all the time, but people that made me better, because I felt like I wanted to learn and grow. And so the two words for me were always laugh and learn, right? If I'm not learning something, I'm actually not having much fun. And if I'm not happy, I actually don't get the most out of learning opportunities because I'm kind of down on myself. So, always saying, what makes me happy? I don't know. When is it that I laugh and learn? When is it that I feel like I'm developing and I'm contributing back? Those are probably the times when you're happiest. And the people that you're with, who are they? What kind of people are they? Like, those are all little telltale signals that help you steer towards that ambiguous thing called happiness.
Absolutely. And I would also say that, that social side there, with those people who are challenging you or lifting you up or, helping you become your best version of yourself, that's your social wealth, right? And then you obviously have your physical wealth, and then you have your, emotional wealth, right? These are all different elements that contribute to your happiness, right? So no, I definitely appreciate that. Now that you have a good feel for my podcast and kind of what it is all about, who is a future guest that you would like to see on this show?
There are a couple of individuals, two people who, and we've talked about one of them, who were mentors or still are mentors to me, but not just as business mentors. They were life mentors. One of them is Hugo. So he would be an interesting guy for you to talk to. He's got more stories than anyone I've ever come across. And the other gentleman, his name is John Cassidy. And John was one of my first bosses at General Foods. But when I said I, at Corus Entertainment, joined back up with some friends from General Foods years, one of them was John, and John was the CEO that created and launched Corus. I was the CMO. I helped with the vision statement and all that, but this was all John's thinking and his doing. But the reason I'd suggest them is that notion of leader versus manager. They were both exceptional leaders, and people remain loyal to them to the day they die. My grandfather said, Ben, to do well in business in Canada, die with more friends than employees. And both Hugo and John I consider to be lifelong friends, not just former bosses and mentors. And that's why.
I love that. And that actually goes with a saying that I remember my brother telling me when I had my first kind of, let's say, big boy job. And he said, the people that are interviewing you or that you're also, joining that interview with, you spend a lot of hours a week, right? So it's not just about the job and the role, it's about the culture, it's about the people. And he said, you want that feeling with them, to be someone that you would want to spend time with outside of work, like go grab a beer with. And he was totally right. That whole saying was, you really want to have that friendship as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was my third mentor, was an incredible woman who changed the shape of business as far as I'm concerned in Canada. Unfortunately passed away, but she was another wonderful influence on me. And that's, if you're lucky enough to have one of those types of mentors, wow, you're hitting it out of the park. I somehow lucked into, was very fortunate to have three of them. And it was amazing to see where they were consistent in their feedback to me or their coaching of me, and where they were slightly different, because it reflected their personalities. And I really benefited from that.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, David, I will definitely, keep those names in mind, because they sound like they would be a great fit for the show to talk about leadership. And, just to end off like this conversation today, I want to say I really enjoyed it a lot. But in terms of my listeners, like where could they go if they want to connect with you, or maybe check out your company or check out your books? Where's the best place for them to go?
The best place, because you can find me, you can find the books, and you can learn about Level 5 at its website, which is www.level5 number 5. So LEVEL 5 strategy, level5strategy.com.
Awesome, David. So I will be sure, to put that in the podcast notes. That way it's super clear, to all my listeners to know where to go. And I just want to take this last moment to thank you again for your time, your generosity, and also sharing all your insights and wisdom.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and you ask good questions.
Thanks so much, David.